Today, we consider the Preventing Harmful Restraint and Seclusion in Schools Act. Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers and I have introduced this bill in December for a simple reason. All children should be safe and protected in school. Last year, the U.S. Government Accountability Office told our committee about the shocking wave of abusive restraint and seclusion in our nation's classrooms. They told us that hundreds of students in this country have been victims of this abuse. In many cases, these victims were our smallest and most vulnerable children, children as young as 4 or 5 years of age, and many students with disabilities. In some instances, tragically, children have died when put into this situation. We learned that while restraint and seclusion should be considered an emergency tactic used as a last resort, far more often these techniques are abused under the guise of discipline or force and compliance. Last year in California, districts reported more than 14,300 cases of seclusion, restraint, and other, quote, emergency, unquote, interventions. With no federal laws in the books restricting restraint and seclusion in school, state laws read like a Wild West. Many states have no regulation whatsoever. We learned that children currently have greater protections from these practices in medical and mental health facilities than in their classrooms, where they spend most of their time. We also learned the heartbreaking stories of Cedric and Paige, 2 young students who were horribly abused by school staff using restraint and seclusion. Like many other victims, Cedric and Paige were not posing a serious threat to their teachers or to their peers. This hearing opened a floodgate of parents with the stories about their children. Parents from Maine to Missouri who felt like they had nowhere to turn called our committee to share the devastation that they had experienced when their children were improperly restrained and locked in seclusion rooms. We cannot allow this traumatic stories to be ignored. When these abuses occur, it isn't just the individual victim who suffered. It hurts their peers who witnessed the traumatizing events. It undermines the vast majority of teachers and staff who are trying to give students a quality education. It's a nightmare for everyone involved. Immediately after our hearings last spring, Education Secretary Arne Duncan announced plans to encourage states to review their policies on seclusion and restraint and ensure that students are safe at school. I understand the Department plans to release their findings in the coming weeks, and I look forward to learning more about the state's efforts. But there is no question that basic federal protections are needed to make clear that restraint and seclusion techniques should be used only as a last resort when someone is in imminent danger of physical injury and there are no alternatives. The Preventing Harmful Restraint and Seclusion in Schools Act will for the first time establish minimum safety standards in our schools, similar to federal protections already in place for children in other facilities that receive federal taxpayer dollars. The bill prohibits mechanical restraints such as strapping children to chairs, misusing therapeutic equipment to punish children, or duct taping parts of their body. It prohibits the chemical restraints like medications used to control behavior without a doctor's prescription, and it prohibits any restrictions any restraint that restricts breathing, and it prohibits any abusive behavior interventions that compromise the health and safety, like denying students food, water, clothing, denying access to the bathroom, or using pepper spray. This bill will prohibit restraints or seclusions from being written into plans for individual students with the intentional planned interventions, but allows schools to plan for appropriate crisis intervention. It will require schools to notify parents after incidents when restraint or seclusion was used, so that parents don't learn about these abuses from whistleblowing teachers or aides or classroom parents about their own child's bruises. This is about helping teachers, not punishing them. This is about fixing a system that doesn't properly support teachers or other school staff. That's why this bill asks states to ensure that enough school staff are properly trained to keep students and staff safe, but gives states and local districts the flexibility to determine the training needs of each individual school. I know we all agree that nothing is more important than keeping our kids safe. It's time that we end this abuse in our schools. This legislation offers us that opportunity. I'm very proud to have worked in a bipartisan way in the introduction of this legislation, and I would like to thank very much Representative McMorris Rodgers for her leadership and her partnership in this effort. I also want to thank the National Disability Rights Network for bringing these abuses to our attention, and to the National School Boards Association and nearly 100 other organizations that are endorsing this legislation. And I urge my colleagues to support this bill.